Welcome to a story that will touch your heart and remind you of the power of human connection. Today, I want to share with you an extraordinary tale about a woman who built an empire but lost her soul in the process. For 2 decades, she ruled her company with an iron fist and a heart of stone. But sometimes, the most unexpected person can change everything. If you're ready to discover how a simple secretary transformed the life of the most feared CEO in Manhattan, then hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of this incredible journey. The 42nd floor of the Sterling Tower pierced through Manhattan's morning fog like a glass dagger. Inside the corner office, Victoria Sterling sat motionless behind her mahogany desk, her steel-gray eyes scanning quarterly reports with the precision of a surgeon examining X-rays. At 55, she commanded Sterling Industries with the same ruthless efficiency that had transformed her father's modest construction company into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The intercom buzzed sharply. "Ms. Sterling, your 9 a.m. is here," announced her assistant's trembling voice. Victoria didn't look up. "Send them in." 3 executives entered, their faces already pale with anticipation. For 20 years, no one had seen Victoria Sterling smile. Her employees whispered stories about the woman who never showed mercy, never displayed warmth, never revealed even a crack in her armor of indifference. Some claimed she had forgotten how to be human. Others believed she had simply chosen not to be. "The Chicago project is running behind schedule," the lead executive stammered, adjusting his tie nervously. Victoria's pen stopped moving. The silence stretched like a taut wire about to snap. When she finally raised her head, her gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Patterson," she said, her voice carrying the chill of a winter morning, "I pay you 6 figures to prevent problems, not to report them to me like a weather forecast, ma'am." The weather delays were unprecedented. Unprecedented? Victoria stood slowly, her black suit impeccable despite the early hour. "The only thing unprecedented here is your incompetence. Fix it, or clean out your desk by noon." Patterson's face crumbled. Behind him, his colleagues shifted uncomfortably, knowing they were witnessing another execution in Victoria's corporate graveyard. She had built her reputation on moments like these, swift, decisive, merciless. As the executives filed out like condemned prisoners, Victoria returned to her reports. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City pulsed with life below, but up here, in her glass tower, everything remained frozen in perpetual winter. The phone rang. "Ms. Sterling," her assistant's voice quavered. "HR needs to speak with you about replacing me." I'm submitting my resignation." Victoria's grip on her pen tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's the 4th assistant this year, Margaret." "I know, ma'am. I'm sorry. I can't anymore." This was the pattern. They came eager, left broken. Victoria Sterling was a machine that consumed hope and exhaled efficiency. She had learned long ago that emotions were liabilities, that kindness was weakness, that a smile was nothing more than a crack in the facade that enemies could exploit. But as Margaret's departure became official that afternoon, something unexpected happened. HR presented her with a single candidate for the position, someone they claimed was different. Someone who had specifically requested to work for the most difficult executive in the building. "Her name is Emma Rodriguez," the HR director explained nervously. "She has excellent references, but she insisted on meeting you personally. She said she doesn't scare easily." Victoria's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch, the closest thing to surprise she'd shown in years. "Send her up tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. If she's even 30 seconds late, don't bother." That night, alone in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Victoria stood by her window holding a glass of wine she wouldn't drink. The city sparkled below like a field of stars, but she felt nothing. For 20 years, feeling nothing had been her greatest strength. Tomorrow, she would interview another assistant who would learn, like all the others, that working for Victoria Sterling meant navigating an emotional wasteland. She had no way of knowing that Emma Rodriguez had spent the last 3 years researching her, studying her patterns, understanding her pain. Emma hadn't applied for a job. She had applied for a mission. And sometimes, the most fortress-like hearts are the ones most desperately in need of saving. The stage was set for a collision between immovable force and unstoppable compassion. Victoria Sterling, who hadn't smiled in 20 years, was about to meet the one person who refused to accept that some people were beyond redemption. The next morning arrived with the crispness of early autumn in Manhattan. Victoria Sterling sat in her office by a.m., as was her ritual. The city was still waking up 42 floors below, but she had already reviewed 3 contracts and denied 2 budget requests. Efficiency was her religion, and she was its most devoted disciple. At exactly a.m., her phone buzzed. "Ms. Sterling, Emma Rodriguez is here for her interview. Send her in." The door opened, and Victoria looked up expecting to see another nervous young woman clutching a resume like a shield. Instead, she found herself staring at someone completely different. Emma Rodriguez walked in with quiet confidence, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a navy blue dress that was professional but not trying too hard to impress. What struck Victoria most was Emma's eyes. Warm brown eyes that met hers directly, without fear or calculation. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling," Emma said, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit. Your resume says you have 5 years of executive assistant experience. Why do you want to work here?" Emma settled into the chair with composed grace. "Because I believe everyone deserves to work with someone who sees their humanity, not just their productivity." The words hung in the air like an unexpected chord in a familiar song. Victoria's pen paused mid-signature. In all her years of interviews, no one had ever given an answer quite like that. "This is a business, Miss Rodriguez, not a therapy session," Victoria replied coolly. "I need someone who can manage my schedule, handle correspondence, and maintain absolute discretion. I don't need someone who's confused about the nature of our relationship." Emma leaned forward slightly, her expression unchanged. "With respect, Ms. Sterling, I'm not confused at all. You need someone efficient and reliable, but you also need someone who won't crumble under pressure or flee after 3 months. The turnover rate for your assistant suggests that technical skills aren't the issue." Victoria felt something stir in her chest. Annoyance, perhaps, or something more complex. "And you think you're different?" "I think," Emma said carefully, "that you've spent years training people to be afraid of you. But fear creates compliance, not competence. I'm not afraid of high standards. I'm not intimidated by intensity. And I don't believe that professional excellence requires personal coldness." The silence that followed was different from Victoria's usual tactical pauses. This time, she was genuinely processing something unexpected. She studied Emma's face, looking for signs of artifice or manipulation, but found only sincere conviction. "My last 4 assistants have described working for me as impossible," Victoria said finally. One compared it to feeding papers into a shredder shaped like a person. For the first time, Emma's composure cracked. Not with fear, but with something that looked almost like sadness. "That must be exhausting," she said quietly. "Being seen as a machine instead of a person." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The observation was so unexpected, so precisely aimed at a truth she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten it herself, that for a moment she couldn't respond. When she did find her voice, it carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "I am not here to be seen, Miss Rodriguez. I am here to run a company. If you're looking for friendship, there are social clubs for that." "I'm not looking for friendship," Emma replied evenly. "I'm looking for purpose. And I believe my purpose might be helping you run your company more effectively by creating an environment where people can do their best work, instead of just trying to survive." Victoria stood abruptly, moving to the window. The morning sun cast long shadows across her office, but she felt as if someone had suddenly turned on a light in a room she'd kept dark for decades. It was disorienting and unwelcome. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why would you want to work for someone everyone else runs from? Emma's reflection appeared in the window beside Victoria's. "Because I see something in you that you've convinced everyone else to stop looking for." "Including yourself," Victoria turned sharply. "And what exactly do you think you see?" "Someone who cared so much that she had to stop caring at all," Emma said simply. "Someone who built walls so high that she forgot there might be a reason to come down from the tower sometimes." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She felt her carefully constructed defenses wavering, and the sensation terrified her more than any business crisis ever had. This stranger, this secretary, had somehow seen through 20 years of protective ice in the span of a 20-minute conversation. "The position starts Monday at 7 a.m., Victoria said abruptly, returning to her desk. "Salary is what you requested. Benefits are standard. Don't mistake my hiring you for validation of your theories about me." Emma stood gracefully. "Thank you, Ms. Sterling. I won't let you down." As she reached the door, Victoria called out, "Miss Rodriguez?" "Yes, ma'am?" "People who work for me don't last because they discover I have no patience for weakness, inefficiency, or sentiment. Are you certain you understand what you're walking into?" Emma paused at the threshold, her hand on the door handle. When she looked back, her smile was gentle but determined. "Mrs. Sterling, I think the real question is, are you ready for someone who won't walk away?" After Emma left, Victoria sat alone in her office, staring at the door that had just closed. For the first time in 20 years, she had hired someone who hadn't spent the entire interview trying to prove they wouldn't disappoint her. Instead, Emma had quietly suggested that Victoria might be the one who had been disappointed too many times. The thought was terrifying. And somehow, for the first time in decades, Victoria Sterling felt curious about what Monday morning might bring. Monday morning came with the same mechanical precision as every other morning in Victoria Sterling's meticulously ordered life. She arrived at a.m., reviewed the overnight reports from their Asian markets, and began her ritual of transforming caffeine into corporate dominance. At 7 a.m. sharp, she expected to begin the familiar process of breaking in another assistant, who would inevitably disappoint her. Instead, at a.m., she smelled coffee. Not the bitter institutional coffee from the executive break room, but something rich and complex that seemed to carry hints of chocolate and cinnamon. She found Emma Rodriguez in the outer office, arranging fresh flowers in a simple glass vase while a small coffee maker, clearly her own, finished brewing. "You're early," Victoria observed, her voice carrying its usual morning frost. Emma looked up from the flowers, completely unfazed. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling. I thought I'd get familiar with the office systems before the day officially started. And I brought you something." She handed Victoria a steaming mug, Colombian dark roast with a touch of vanilla. "I noticed your empty coffee cups in the trash were from that chain downstairs, but they burn their beans. This might be better." Victoria accepted the mug suspiciously. She had been drinking the same terrible coffee for 10 years, not because she enjoyed it, but because noticing something as trivial as coffee quality seemed frivolous. She took a cautious sip. The coffee was perfect, rich without being overwhelming, smooth without losing its strength. It was the kind of coffee that made you pause and actually taste what you were drinking instead of just using it as fuel. "It's adequate," Victoria said, which in her vocabulary was equivalent to a standing ovation. "I'm glad," Emma replied, and Victoria caught something in her tone, not triumph or smugness, but simple pleasure at having done something thoughtful. When was the last time anyone had done something thoughtful for her without expecting something in return? The morning proceeded with surprising efficiency. Emma had somehow mastered Victoria's scheduling system overnight, rearranging back-to-back meetings to allow for proper preparation time while still accommodating everyone's needs. She fielded phone calls with a combination of professionalism and warmth that Victoria had never heard in her own office. "Ms. Sterling will need to review the quarterly projections before the 2 p.m. meeting," Emma told someone on the phone. "Could you send them by noon?" "That would be perfect, thank you so much." Victoria found herself listening to these conversations with growing bewilderment. Emma never promised what Victoria couldn't deliver, never overcommitted her time, but somehow managed to make every caller feel heard and valued instead of dismissed and intimidated. At 11:30, Emma knocked on Victoria's door. "Ms. Sterling? Your lunch meeting with the Patterson Group has been moved to the conference room on 38. Mr. Patterson specifically requested the change." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Did he provide a reason for the accommodation?" "He mentioned something about preferring a neutral environment for sensitive discussions." The implication was clear. Patterson, still smarting from Victoria's dressing down earlier that week, was trying to level the playing field by removing her from her territorial advantage. It was a small act of corporate rebellion, but Victoria had crushed executives for less. "Call him back," Victoria said icily. "Tell him the meeting location was set for a reason, and if he's uncomfortable in my office, perhaps he's uncomfortable with the entire project." Emma hesitated. "Ms. Sterling, may I suggest an alternative approach?" Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I don't recall asking for suggestions." "You're absolutely right," Emma said calmly. "But Patterson is scared. He made a mistake, he's been publicly corrected, and now he's trying to regain some sense of control. If you crush him completely, you'll win the battle but lose a potentially valuable team member. Mr. Patterson's feelings are not my concern." "No," Emma agreed, "but his productivity is. And people who feel cornered tend to make desperate choices. Sometimes they quit. Sometimes they sabotage projects just to prove they still have power." Victoria stared at Emma, feeling that unfamiliar sensation again. The sense that someone was seeing her actions from an angle she hadn't considered. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Meet him in the 38 conference room, but arrive 5 minutes early. When he walks in expecting to have gained some advantage, you'll already be there, reviewing his project files. It sends the message that you're so confident in your position that his location change is irrelevant to you." The strategy was elegant in its psychology. Victoria would maintain her dominance while allowing Patterson to save face, potentially transforming a defensive employee back into a productive one. It was the kind of nuanced management approach that Victoria had never considered because she'd never needed to consider it. Fear had always been simpler than finesse. "Fine," Victoria said eventually. "But if this backfires, then the responsibility is mine," Emma finished quietly. At 12:30, Victoria found herself in the 38th floor conference room. Patterson's files spread before her like a general reviewing battle plans. When Patterson arrived at exactly 1 p.m., his face showed a flicker of surprise, then something that might have been respect. The meeting proceeded more smoothly than any they'd had in months. As they returned to the 42nd floor afterward, Victoria felt an unusual sensation in her chest. It took her a moment to identify it. Satisfaction that didn't come from defeating someone, but from achieving a better outcome for everyone involved. "The Patterson approach worked," she told Emma without preamble. "I'm glad. He's actually quite brilliant when he's not terrified." Victoria paused at her office door. "How did you know?" "Know what?" "That I needed to adjust my method." Emma considered her words carefully. "You've built a reputation for being uncompromising, because compromise has probably been used against you before. But there's a difference between having high standards and being impossible to work with. You never needed to change your standards, just your delivery method." That afternoon, Victoria found herself watching Emma work through her glass office walls. There was something different about the energy in the outer office. People still approached with respect, but the desperate fear was gone. Emma had somehow created a buffer zone where Victoria's intensity could be translated into clear expectations rather than personal attacks. At 6 p.m., as the office emptied, Emma knocked again. "I'm heading home." "Mrs. Sterling, is there anything else you need?" Victoria looked up from her computer, realizing with surprise that she had been working for hours without feeling the usual grinding tension in her shoulders. "No, you can go." Emma gathered her things, then paused. "Ms. Sterling? Thank you for trusting me with the Patterson situation today. I know taking advice from the new secretary wasn't exactly in your comfort zone." Victoria almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she nodded curtly. "We'll see if it continues to work." After Emma left, Victoria sat alone in her office as twilight painted Manhattan in shades of gold and purple. The coffee mug Emma had brought her that morning sat empty on her desk, and for some reason she didn't want to throw it away. For the first time in 20 years, Victoria Sterling was beginning to understand the difference between being respected and being feared, and despite every instinct telling her that emotions were dangerous, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow morning's coffee. 3 weeks into Emma's tenure, Victoria Sterling's office had undergone a transformation so subtle that she almost didn't notice it herself. The changes weren't dramatic. Fresh flowers appeared twice weekly, the coffee was consistently excellent, and her schedule flowed with an efficiency that somehow felt less mechanical. But it was the intangible shifts that were slowly unraveling her carefully constructed fortress. On a rainy Thursday morning, Victoria arrived to find Emma on a phone call that clearly wasn't business-related. "No," Mrs. Chen, you don't need to apologize, Emma was saying softly. These things happen. Just take care of yourself, okay? We'll reschedule for next week. Victoria paused in her office doorway listening. Emma's voice carried a warmth that was entirely absent from the usual corporate communications that filled their days. Personal call? Victoria asked after Emma hung up. Emma looked up, her expression slightly embarrassed. I'm sorry. That was Mrs. Chen from the cleaning service. Her daughter is sick, so she can't come today. I was just telling her not to worry about it. Victoria nodded briskly and moved toward her office, but something made her stop. Is her daughter seriously ill? Oh no, just a regular childhood bug. But Mrs. Chen is a single mother, and she's always worried about letting people down when family emergencies come up. I think she's been fired from jobs before for having to choose between work and her daughter. Victoria found herself thinking about this conversation throughout the morning. She had never considered the personal circumstances of the people who cleaned her office. They were simply part of the building's infrastructure, like the elevators or the air conditioning. But Emma saw them as individuals with families, fears, and stories worth caring about. At lunch, Victoria made a decision that surprised even her. Emma, get me the contact information for Mrs. Chen's daughter's school. Of course, but may I ask why? Sterling Industries has a scholarship fund for employees' children. I want to know if Mrs. Chen qualifies. Emma's face lit up with something Victoria had never seen directed at her before. Pure, unguarded joy. That's wonderful, Ms. Sterling. She'll be so grateful. Victoria felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. It's simply good business practice to support our service providers. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, Emma's humanity had begun to infect her own decision-making process. That afternoon brought a crisis that would test everything Victoria thought she knew about herself. James Morrison, Sterling Industries' head of international development, burst into her office without an appointment, his face flushed with anger and desperation. Victoria, I need to talk to you. Now. Victoria looked up from her computer, her expression instantly turning glacial. Mr. Morrison, you seem to have forgotten how to make appointments. The Tokyo deal is falling apart, Morrison said, ignoring her tone. Our translator made a critical error in the contract negotiations. We're looking at a potential $50 million loss. The old Victoria would have erupted. She would have demanded to know who was responsible, why safeguards had failed, and she would have begun planning the systematic destruction of everyone involved. Instead, she found herself asking, what exactly happened? Morrison explained the situation, a cultural miscommunication that had offended their Japanese partners, who were now threatening to withdraw from the deal entirely. As he talked, Victoria noticed Emma standing quietly in the doorway, having clearly heard the raised voices. Options? Victoria asked curtly. We could try to salvage the relationship, but it would require a personal apology from someone at the executive level. And even then, there's no guarantee they'll accept it. The room fell silent. Victoria stared at the quarterly reports on her screen, seeing $50 million of projected revenue dissolving into corporate embarrassment. The old Victoria would have written off the deal and punished everyone involved, but something had changed in the past 3 weeks. Book me a flight to Tokyo, she said finally. Tonight, if possible. Morrison's eyebrows shot up. Victoria, you haven't traveled internationally for business in over 5 years. Then it's overdue. Victoria stood, moving to her window. Emma, I'll need my travel documents prepared and a cultural briefing on Japanese business etiquette. And find me someone who can help me craft an appropriate apology, in Japanese. After Morrison left, Emma approached Victoria's desk hesitantly. Mrs. Sterling, may I ask what changed your mind about the trip? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain streak down her windows. 3 weeks ago, I would have cut our losses and moved on, but you've shown me something I'd forgotten. What's that? That people are worth fighting for, even when they make mistakes. Victoria turned from the window, her expression unreadable. The translator who made the error, he has 2 children and a mortgage. The Tokyo project team has worked for 18 months on this deal. $50 million isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It represents dozens of families, hundreds of jobs. Emma smiled. The first truly radiant smile Victoria had seen from her. That's a beautiful way to look at business. Don't romanticize it, Victoria said quickly, but without her usual sharpness. It's still about profit and loss. I'm just considering a broader definition of loss. The next morning, as Victoria prepared to leave for the airport, Emma handed her a small wrapped package. What's this? Something for the plane. You don't have to open it now. On the flight to Tokyo, Victoria unwrapped Emma's gift to find a leather journal with a handwritten note tucked inside. For capturing thoughts worth remembering. Safe travels. Victoria stared at the note for a long time. When was the last time someone had given her a gift that wasn't calculated to gain favor or influence? When was the last time someone had wished her safe travels and meant it simply because they cared about her well-being? The Tokyo trip was successful. Victoria's willingness to make the journey personally, combined with a carefully crafted apology, salvaged the deal and actually strengthened their partnership. But the real transformation happened during the 14-hour flight home. Victoria opened Emma's journal and began writing. Not business notes or strategic planning, but thoughts, reflections, questions she hadn't allowed herself to ask in 20 years. I have spent 2 decades building walls, she wrote. But walls that keep pain out also keep connection out. Emma sees this. She sees me, and for the first time in 20 years, I am beginning to see myself through someone else's eyes. The view is different. When Victoria returned to New York, she found her office exactly as she'd left it, but somehow warmer. Emma had maintained everything perfectly, but more than that, she had maintained the space as if it mattered to her personally. How was Tokyo? Emma asked, genuine curiosity and concern in her voice. Successful, Victoria replied, then added, Thank you for the journal. I found it useful. As Emma smiled and returned to her work, Victoria realized something that both terrified and exhilarated her. For the first time in 20 years, she was looking forward to tomorrow, not because of what she might accomplish, but because of who she might spend the day with. The Ice Queen was beginning to thaw, and for the first time since she could remember, Victoria Sterling was curious about who she might become once the ice was gone. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 2 months after Emma Rodriguez had walked into Victoria Sterling's life with coffee and quiet confidence. Victoria arrived at the office to find Emma on her hands and knees beneath the desk, trying to retrieve something from behind the filing cabinet. "What are you doing?" Victoria asked, setting down her briefcase. Emma's voice was muffled but frustrated. "I dropped my grandmother's ring. It rolled under here and I can't quite reach it." Without thinking, Victoria set down her purse and knelt beside Emma. "Here, let me help." Together, they pushed the heavy cabinet just enough for Emma to stretch her arm into the narrow space. When her fingers finally closed around the small gold band, she sat back on her heels with a sigh of relief. "Got it," Emma said, then looked up to find Victoria still kneeling beside her on the office floor, both of them slightly disheveled from the rescue operation. And then it happened. Victoria looked at Emma, really looked at her. She saw the determination that had driven Emma to crawl under furniture for a piece of family jewelry. She saw the gratitude in Emma's eyes, not for having a boss who helped, but for having someone who cared enough to get on the floor beside her. She saw the way Emma's hair had escaped its professional arrangement and was curling softly around her face. In that moment, something inside Victoria's chest cracked open like ice, breaking up on a frozen lake. The sensation was so powerful, so unexpected, that it bypassed every defense she had built over 20 years. Victoria Sterling smiled. Not the cold corporate expression she wore in board meetings. Not the calculated gesture she used to close deals. This was a real smile, warm, genuine, and utterly transformative. It started at the corners of her eyes and spread across her face like sunrise breaking over a landscape that had been dark for too long. Emma saw it happen. Her eyes widened with wonder, as if she was witnessing something miraculous, and perhaps she was. "Ms. Sterling," Emma whispered, "you're smiling." Victoria's hand flew to her face, touching her lips as if to confirm that the smile was real. For a moment, she looked startled by her own expression, like someone who had forgotten they knew how to dance and suddenly found themselves waltzing. Victoria started, then stopped. She was still kneeling on the office floor, still close enough to Emma to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. I suppose I am. They stayed there for a heartbeat longer than necessary, both of them recognizing that something fundamental had shifted. Then Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt and attempting to restore her composure. But the smile lingered, softer now but still present. "We should get back to work," Victoria said, but her voice lacked its usual command. Instead, it carried something that sounded almost like contentment. The day proceeded differently than any day in the past 20 years. Victoria found herself pausing to actually listen when employees spoke to her, rather than simply waiting for them to finish. She asked Tom Patterson about his daughter's college applications, not because she needed the information, but because she remembered Emma mentioning that he was worried about tuition costs. During lunch, she called Mrs. Chen personally to tell her that her daughter had been approved for the Sterling Industries scholarship. "Ms. Sterling?" Mrs. Chen's voice was barely audible through her tears. "Thank you so much. You don't know what this means to our family." "Actually," Victoria said, glancing toward Emma's desk, "I think I'm beginning to understand exactly what it means." That afternoon, Victoria did something she hadn't done in decades. She left the office early. At PM, she stopped at Emma's desk. "I'm going home," she announced. "Handle anything urgent and everything else can wait until tomorrow." Emma looked up from her computer, clearly surprised. "Of course, Ms. Sterling. Is everything all right?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "Everything is different, but I think different might be better." As she walked toward the elevator, Victoria caught her reflection in the polished metal doors. The woman looking back at her was still professional, still commanding, but there was something new in her eyes, something that looked remarkably like hope. That evening, Victoria stood in her penthouse apartment, but instead of her usual position by the window overlooking the city, she found herself on her balcony, breathing the autumn air. For the first time in years, she called her sister Rebecca in California. "Victoria?" Rebecca's voice carried surprise and concern. "Is everything okay?" "You never call unless there's a family emergency." "There's no emergency," Victoria said, realizing as she spoke that she was still smiling slightly. "I just wanted to talk to you." They talked for an hour. About Rebecca's children, about their parents, about memories Victoria had locked away for decades. When she finally hung up, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in 20 years. The warm satisfaction of human connection. The next morning, Emma arrived to find her desk decorated with a small bouquet of sunflowers and a note written in Victoria's precise handwriting. "Thank you for reminding me that some things are worth getting on the floor for. V.S." When Victoria arrived at AM, she found Emma holding the note with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Emma said simply. Victoria nodded, then did something that would have been unthinkable just 3 months earlier. She touched Emma's shoulder gently, a brief contact that conveyed more than any corporate memo ever could. Over the following weeks, the transformation in Sterling Industries was remarkable. Victoria still maintained her high standards, still demanded excellence, but she had learned to inspire rather than intimidate. The turnover rate in her department dropped to 0. Productivity actually increased as people began bringing their best ideas to a CEO who might listen rather than dismiss. The business press began to notice. "Sterling Industries, a corporate culture revolution," read one headline. But Victoria didn't care about the articles. She cared about the fact that Tom Patterson had been promoted to regional director. She cared about Mrs. Chen's daughter, who was now thriving in college. She cared about the fact that her office had become a place where people wanted to work, not a place they endured. Most of all, she cared about Emma Rodriguez, who had seen through 20 years of protective ice to the woman trapped beneath. On a Friday afternoon in December, exactly 3 months after Emma's first day, Victoria made a decision that would have shocked her former self. "Emma," she said, appearing at her assistant's desk, "would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not business, just dinner, between friends." Emma's smile could have powered the entire Sterling Tower. "I would love that." "Victoria," And for the first time in 20 years, Victoria Sterling, who had built an empire but nearly lost her soul, felt genuinely excited about spending time with another human being. As they left the office together that evening, Victoria caught another glimpse of her reflection. The woman in the polished elevator doors was smiling again, and this time she didn't look surprised by it. Some walls, once broken, stay broken forever, and sometimes that's exactly the way it should be. And there you have it. The incredible transformation of Victoria Sterling, a woman who thought she had to choose between success and humanity, only to discover that the greatest success comes from embracing both. This story reminds us that no matter how high we build our walls, no matter how long we've been protecting ourselves from pain, it's never too late for connection. Sometimes the most profound changes come not from grand gestures, but from small acts of kindness, consistent care, and the courage to see the person behind the persona. Emma Rodriguez didn't just become Victoria's secretary. She became her reminder that vulnerability isn't weakness, that caring isn't a liability, and that the smile we've forgotten how to wear might be the most beautiful thing about us. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of transformation and hope. Share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that it's never too late to let the walls come down. And remember, we all have the power to be someone's Emma Rodriguez. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is simply refusing to give up on them. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I'll see you in the next story.